I thought it was just a mistake at the wedding reception, nothing worth destroying her life over. I told herself he would forgive her, like always. But then the envelope arrived, legal papers that turned her world upside down. I never believed one mistake could cost me everything, because I told myself it wasn't even really a mistake at all, just a moment that got carried away in the wrong place, at the wrong time behind the chapel, while music played and everyone toasted the happy couple, and I thought I was clever enough to keep it secret. I told myself Michael wouldn't find out, or if he did, he would forgive me. Like always, because he loved me too much to ever leave, I convinced myself it was nothing serious, not worth destroying a marriage or a family over. I laughed when people said the truth always comes out, because I thought I could control the story, twist it, make everyone see it my way. But then one morning, a man in a grey suit knocked on the door, handed me an envelope and walked away without a word. Inside were legal papers, pages and pages with my name on every line. And as I read them, the words turned heavy and cold in my hands. That was the moment I realized Michael had been silent. Not because he was hurt, but because he was planning everything, while I kept telling myself I had done nothing wrong. The wedding was supposed to be perfect, with white roses along the aisle, and music floating through the warm evening air. But my mind wasn't on Clara's vows, or the way Gideon kept smiling down at her. My best friend looked radiant, but I kept thinking about the way he had been looking at me all week, as if there was something unspoken between us, and maybe there was. I told myself it was nothing serious, just a harmless glance here and there, something to make me feel wanted again. Because Michael hadn't looked at me like that in years, and I hated how ordinary our marriage had become. Gideon caught me outside the reception, near the side door, while Clara was laughing with guests, and I was supposed to be finding more champagne for the toast. He said it felt wrong standing here alone with me on his wedding night, but his voice was unsteady, and I told him it was only a conversation, nothing else. We were just talking away from the noise. We stood too close, both of us pretending it was accidental, and I told myself nothing was happening even when my heart pounded, because it was easier to believe I was still in control. I laughed at something he said, leaning closer than I needed to, and he didn't move away. Maybe he should have. Maybe I should have too. But instead, I told myself it wasn't my fault if he didn't stop me. If he was thinking the same thing I was thinking, then how could I be the only one to blame? When Michael asked later why I disappeared for so long, I said I was helping the staff, and he believed me. At least I thought he did. The look in his eyes was hard to read. Michael was always quiet about things that mattered. It drove me crazy sometimes, because I wanted him to fight for me, to get angry, to demand answers, but he never did. He just nodded slowly and said it must have been busy in the kitchen, then went back to helping Lydia with her shoes. She had been running around all evening like the 7-year-old she was, full of energy and unaware of anything strange. I told myself that meant everything was fine. If Michael didn't yell, if he didn't accuse me, then nothing had happened. Not really. I saw Clara later hugging her relatives, and I smiled at her as if I hadn't just betrayed her in the worst way possible. I told myself she didn't need to know. It would only hurt her, so why tell her at all? That was the line I kept repeating in my head even when I knew it was a lie. The reception carried on, full of music and lights, while I kept stealing glances at Michael, wondering if he was watching me. He talked to Gideon once near the bar, the two of them shaking hands like normal friends, and I told myself that proved nothing was wrong. Michael didn't know. He couldn't know. I had been too careful, but then I saw him later, standing by the edge of the dance floor, his eyes following me. Not with anger exactly, but with this quiet stillness that made me feel colder than if he had shouted at me in front of everyone. I told myself he was just tired. Weddings were long days, full of noise and family. Maybe that was all it was. I convinced myself of that even when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number telling me someone had seen us behind the chapel, and that secrets like that never stayed buried for long. I deleted it before Michael could see it, because there was no point worrying him over nothing. People like to stir trouble, especially at weddings. Someone probably imagined they saw more than they did, I told myself the message didn't matter, but my hands kept shaking when I tried to eat the cake later. Gideon avoided looking at me for the rest of the night. Clara kept smiling at everyone like her life had just begun, and maybe it had, while mine felt like it was slowly unraveling. Though I wouldn't admit it, not even to myself. When Michael asked again, at the end of the night, why I seemed distracted, I told him I was just tired from helping Clara with the decorations earlier. He nodded the same quiet nod as before, kissed Lydia goodnight, and drove us home in silence. I told myself he was only tired too, that marriages went through quiet spells like this all the time, and tomorrow, everything would be back to normal. I told myself that even as I noticed the way he kept his eyes on the road instead of looking at me the whole drive home. I told myself it didn't mean anything, because the alternative was admitting maybe it did. The next morning, the house felt too quiet, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Michael made breakfast for Lydia without saying much to me, and I told myself he was just tired from the long night before. I tried to act normal, laughing about how late the wedding had gone, but he only nodded, setting a plate in front of our daughter and telling her to eat before school. When she asked if we could all go out for ice cream later, he said maybe, his voice calm but distant, and I hated how it sounded like he was already somewhere far away. I told myself he would get over it, whatever he thought he knew, because people forget things when enough time passes. I convinced myself to stay cheerful, texting my sister Ivy about how beautiful Clara's wedding had been, and how everyone had cried during the vows, leaving out, of course, the part where I disappeared behind the chapel. Ivy wrote back, saying Clara deserved happiness after the rough year she had, and that she hoped I was okay too because I sounded stressed. I told her I was fine, just busy with work, because that was easier than admitting I couldn't stop wondering if Michael knew something, or if someone had told him. When I asked him casually if he talked to Clara much at the reception, he said only for a minute to congratulate her, nothing else, then went back to drinking his coffee, like the conversation didn't matter. I hated how calm he looked, like he wasn't even angry, just thoughtful, as if he was figuring out a puzzle. I told myself if he really suspected something, he would ask me directly, but he didn't, so I decided to act like everything was fine. When I met Clara for lunch 2 days later, she seemed distracted, tired maybe from the honeymoon preparations. She asked if I was okay, because Michael looked tense when they spoke at the wedding. I laughed and told her he was just stressed from work, nothing serious. I told myself it wasn't a real lie because Michael did have deadlines sometimes. Clara smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, and for a second I wondered if she had heard rumors already. The message I got during the reception kept flashing in my mind, but I didn't ask her about it because that would make it real. Instead, I told her the wedding was beautiful, that Gideon looked happy, that everyone was talking about how perfect they were as a couple, and she seemed pleased hearing it, so I thought maybe she didn't know anything after all. When I got home, Michael was in the living room helping Lydia with her homework. He asked if I had fun at lunch. I said yes and asked about his day. He said it was fine, then went back to explaining math problems to our daughter like I wasn't even there. I told myself he was just focused on being a good father, that maybe the distance between us was my imagination. But later that night, when I tried to talk to him about planning a weekend trip like we used to, he said he was busy the next few weekends with work things, and maybe later we could talk about it. His tone was polite but final, and I felt this small, sharp panic in my chest, like something was slipping through my fingers. I told myself he was just tired, but then I noticed he had started sleeping in the guest room, saying he didn't want to wake me when he came in late from work. He had never done that before. I asked him if something was wrong. He said no, just that it was easier this way for now, and I didn't know what that meant. I told myself it was temporary, that marriages had quiet seasons, but when Ivy visited on Saturday, she asked why Michael seemed so cold lately, and I said he was under pressure at work. She looked at me like she didn't believe me, but didn't press it. Lydia asked that night why Daddy didn't eat dinner with us anymore, and I told her he was busy with important things, grown-up things. She nodded like she understood, but her eyes looked confused, and I hated Michael a little for making her feel that way, even though I told myself it wasn't my fault, because I was trying to keep the family together while he was the one pulling away. Or at least, that was the story I told myself every time I saw him working late in his office, or coming home after Lydia was already asleep, as if the house didn't belong to both of us anymore. The quiet between us grew heavier each day, but I kept telling everyone, including myself, that everything was fine, because saying it out loud made it easier to pretend it was true. By the third week after the wedding, the silence in our house had turned into something heavy and permanent, like a piece of furniture no one could move anymore. Michael still spoke to Lydia with warmth, asked about her school projects, helped her practice spelling words, but when it came to me, his words were short, practical, stripped of anything personal. He asked if I paid the electricity bill, reminded me of Lydia's dentist appointment, told me what time he would be home, but nothing beyond that. I told myself he was just busy, that men had moods like this sometimes, that he would come around when work settled down. That was easier than admitting I felt like someone standing on thin ice, listening for cracks. It was Ivy who first mentioned the gossip. We were at a cafe near her office, sipping coffee while she scrolled through her phone, when she said people online were talking about Clara's wedding, about something they thought happened behind the chapel. My stomach tightened, but I kept my face calm and asked who was saying that. She shrugged and said mutual friends, some of them claiming Michael looked like he knew something that night. I laughed, told her people loved drama, that they were inventing stories because weddings were boring once the pictures were posted. Ivy nodded, but she looked at me too long, like she was waiting for me to slip up. I told myself she had no proof, that no one did, and even if Michael heard something, it would be my word against rumors. Still, my hands trembled when I paid the bill. 2 days later, Michael joined me and a few of our friends for lunch at a downtown cafe. It felt strange having him there since he usually avoided social things lately. At first, I thought maybe it was a good sign, like he wanted to be part of things again. But halfway through, one of our friends, Julie, mentioned the wedding gossip like it was a joke everyone had already heard. She said someone claimed they saw me and Gideon disappearing behind the chapel for a long time, and that it looked suspicious. People laughed, the kind of nervous laughter people use when they want to see how someone reacts. My heart slammed against my ribs, but I forced a smile and rolled my eyes, saying, people love to make up stories because real life wasn't exciting enough for them. I added that Gideon probably needed help finding the photographer, or something ordinary like that, and people nodded, half believing me, half not caring. I didn't look at Michael while I spoke, but I felt him watching me. He didn't defend me, didn't say a word in my favor, just sipped his coffee slowly, like he had all the time in the world. When Julie left the table to take a call, I leaned toward Michael and said people were being ridiculous spreading lies like that. He only nodded once and said, ridiculous, in this flat voice that made my skin crawl because it didn't sound like agreement. It sounded like observation. I told myself if he was really angry, he would say so. Men didn't stay quiet if they cared. That's what I wanted to believe. But when the bill came, Michael paid for everyone without looking at me, like he wanted the lunch to end quickly. On the way out, he held the door for Ivy, for Julie, for everyone else, but not for me. Small things, barely noticeable, but enough to make my chest ache. That evening, Michael's parents called. Ruth asked if everything was okay because someone told her about the gossip, and she didn't like hearing our family name mixed up in rumors. I told her people exaggerated everything, that nothing happened, that Michael was just tired lately. She was polite, but her tone had cooled, like she was filing the conversation away for later. When I told Michael about the call, he didn't say anything, just kept typing on his laptop. I said his mother seemed worried, and he said, I'm sure she is, without looking at me. I hated that I couldn't read him anymore, that the man who used to tell me everything now kept whole parts of his life locked away where I couldn't reach. That night, I heard him talking on the phone in the guest room with someone, low and serious. When I asked who it was, he said, work, nothing important. I told myself that was true, but my stomach knotted anyway because lately, everything he said felt like it had another meaning I couldn't see. A week later, I saw him downtown, walking into an office building with a gold plaque by the door that read, Harrison and Cole Attorneys at Law. I told myself maybe he had a work meeting there, maybe it was about taxes or something ordinary, but he didn't tell me about it afterward, didn't mention it at all, like it had nothing to do with me. And maybe it didn't. Maybe that was the point. By the time 2 more weeks passed, the distance between Michael and me felt like a wall, built brick by brick, while I wasn't paying attention, and now it was too high to climb over. He still spoke to me when necessary, still helped Lydia with her homework, still mowed the lawn on Saturdays, but everything was done with this calm, cold efficiency, like he was crossing off tasks on a list rather than living a life with us. I told myself marriages went through quiet seasons, that he was just stressed, that maybe the gossip would fade soon if I kept acting like everything was normal. But normal didn't come back, no matter how hard I pretended. One evening I made his favorite dinner, roast chicken, garlic potatoes, the works, and set the table like we used to before Lydia was born, when dinners felt like little celebrations. He came home late, looked at the table, said thank you, and ate in silence while Lydia told him about her day. He smiled at her stories, nodded at her excitement, but when she asked if we could all go to the park on Saturday like we used to, he said he would be busy and maybe another time. The way her face fell made something twist painfully inside me, but he didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did and didn't care. After Lydia went to bed, I told him we needed to talk. He said we were talking now in that same flat voice that made everything feel colder. I told him people were saying things that weren't true, that someone must have started the rumor about the wedding because they were jealous or bored. He asked me calmly if it was a rumor. Just like that. No anger, no raised voice. I said of course it was, and he nodded like he was filing the answer away somewhere in his mind where I couldn't reach. I told him Clara hadn't said anything to me about it, that surely, if it was serious, she would have confronted me. He said maybe Clara already knew enough and didn't need my version. I hated the way he said that, like there was something final in his tone, but I told myself he was only tired, that I could still fix this if I explained things the right way. 2 days later, Ivy stopped by the house with coffee and asked quietly if Michael was okay, because he looked pale and worn out the last time she saw him. I told her he was fine, just busy, that people were reading too much into things. She hesitated before saying someone told her Michael had been seen going into a law office downtown, and my hands went cold around the coffee cup. But I laughed like it was nothing, saying maybe it was about taxes or work contracts. She looked at me for a long moment before changing the subject, like she didn't believe me but didn't want to say it out loud. That evening, Michael came home early for once and spent an hour in the guest room with the door closed, talking on the phone. When he came out, he told me Lydia would be staying with his parents for the weekend because they missed her and wanted to take her to the zoo. He didn't ask if I minded. He just told me like it was already decided. I said that was fine, but my chest felt tight because he had never made plans without talking to me first. That night, while he was in the shower, a courier knocked on the door with a thick envelope addressed to me. I thought it was some delivery Michael ordered until I saw the words, "Legal notice" on the front. My hand shook as I carried it to the kitchen and opened it under the bright light above the counter. The first page mentioned separation proceedings, custody considerations, financial disclosures. My eyes blurred over the words, refusing to believe what I was reading. When Michael came out of the shower, I held the papers out to him, demanding to know what they were. He said calmly that they were exactly what they looked like, that he had already spoken to a lawyer, that everything would be handled properly and legally. I told him he was overreacting, that this was crazy, that we could talk things through, but he only said there was nothing to talk about anymore. His voice wasn't angry. It was worse than angry. It was empty. That was the night I realized he hadn't been silent because he didn't know what to do. He had been silent because he already knew exactly what to do. The following Monday, I sat in the waiting area of Harrison and Cole Attorneys at Law, clutching the letter I had read 100 times over the weekend, hoping there had been some mistake, that Michael would come to his senses and call the whole thing off. He hadn't spoken to me since handing me the papers, except to arrange for Lydia to stay another few nights with his parents, saying she needed stability while we figured things out. I told myself he was only trying to scare me, that he didn't really mean to go through with this, but then his lawyer came out, introduced himself politely, and handed me copies of everything Michael had already filed. Petitions for separation, preliminary custody agreements, financial disclosures that froze half-hour accounts until the court decided otherwise. My name was everywhere in those documents, printed in bold letters that made me feel like a stranger reading about someone else's life falling apart. When I asked what all this meant, the lawyer said calmly that Michael was seeking primary custody of Lydia, division of assets according to the prenup, and exclusive rights to the house because of marital misconduct. He said the phrase like it was, just another box to tick, while my hands trembled so hard I nearly dropped the folder. I told him there had been no misconduct, that this was all based on gossip, but he only said Michael had evidence and that everything would be presented in court. Evidence. The word clanged around in my head for the rest of the day. When I got home, Michael was packing some of his things into neat boxes, labeling each one carefully, like he had been planning this for weeks. I demanded to know what kind of evidence he thought he had, but he only said the court would see it soon enough. He spoke without looking at me, his voice steady, calm, like someone discussing the weather. I told him this was cruel, unnecessary, that we could handle things privately, but he said this was the only way to protect Lydia and himself. The way he said protect made my chest tighten, like I was some kind of danger he had to shield her from. That night, I called Ivy in tears, telling her Michael was trying to destroy our family over rumors, but she was quiet for a long time before asking if the rumors were true. I told her they weren't, that people were twisting things, but my voice didn't sound convincing even to myself. She said Michael didn't seem like the kind of man who would do all this without good reason, and hearing her take his side felt like betrayal layered on top of everything else. The next morning, Michael's parents came to the house to collect more of Lydia's things, saying she would stay with them until things settled down. Ruth wouldn't look at me while she packed clothes into a small suitcase, and Daniel only said the situation was sad for everyone before carrying the bag out to the car. I tried to talk to Lydia, to tell her Mommy and Daddy just needed to work some things out, but she looked confused and kept asking why Daddy wasn't staying in the house anymore. I didn't have an answer that made sense to either of us. By Friday, my own lawyer told me Michael had submitted bank records, phone logs, even a sworn statement from someone at the wedding, claiming they saw me with Gideon behind the chapel. My lawyer asked if any of it was true, and when I hesitated, she sighed like she already knew the answer. She said the custody case would be hard to win if Michael pushed this far, especially since he had no history of anger or neglect, while I now had a reputation problem spreading through half the people we knew. That night, I drove past Michael's parents' house just to see if Lydia was okay, but the lights were off and the street was quiet, so I sat in the car for a long time before going home to an empty house that didn't feel like mine anymore. On the kitchen counter, Michael had left another envelope with financial documents outlining temporary support, mortgage arrangements, schedules for Lydia if the court approved them. He signed it all neatly at the bottom, as if this was just business now. Nothing personal, nothing left to discuss. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing on the courthouse steps, the sky grey above the brick building that now held everything I used to call my life. Michael was already inside with his lawyer when I arrived, looking calm in a dark suit, like this was just another meeting on his calendar. I told myself he would soften once we were in front of the judge, that he would see me crying and remember we had built a family together, that we had a daughter who needed both of us. But when the hearing started, Michael never even looked at me. His lawyer presented the evidence in quiet, professional tones. The sworn statement from the wedding guest, the phone records showing calls between me and Gideon before the wedding, the bank documents proving Michael had handled all the finances, while I drained one account in the weeks after. My lawyer tried to argue it was circumstantial, that none of it proved I was unfit as a mother, but the judge kept glancing at the timelines, the receipts, the photographs Michael had gathered so carefully, while I was busy pretending nothing was wrong. When Michael finally spoke, his voice didn't shake. He said he wanted stability for Lydia, that the house should remain with the parent who could provide the most consistency, that the accounts should be divided according to the prenup we had both signed before marriage. He never raised his voice, never blamed me directly, never even said the word betrayal. He just laid out facts like stones across a river, one by one, until there was a clear path leading away from the life we had shared. The judge asked if I had anything to say. I wanted to scream that it wasn't fair, that Michael was making me look like a villain over one mistake, that he was turning our daughter against me. But all I managed was a few sentences about rumors and misunderstandings, words that sounded weak even to my own ears. The judge reviewed everything for what felt like hours before announcing the decision. Michael would have primary custody of Lydia. The house would remain his. The accounts would be split according to the prenup, and visitation schedules would be set by the court. His lawyer handed me a folder with all the paperwork neatly organized inside. The final decree signed at the back, with the date stamped in dark ink like the closing line of a story I didn't want to read. Michael thanked the judge, shook his lawyer's hand, and started gathering his things, while I just stood there, gripping the folder like it might burn through my skin. Outside the courthouse, the wind was sharp enough to sting my eyes, or maybe that was just the tears I refused to let fall where Michael could see them. He walked past me on the steps without stopping, without gloating, without even looking back, as if I were just another stranger leaving the building. Ruth was waiting with Lydia by the car, and when she saw me, she gave a small polite nod but said nothing. Lydia waved shyly before climbing into the back seat, clutching the stuffed rabbit she always carried when she was nervous. I wanted to run after her, to tell her Mommy loved her, that things would go back to how they used to be, but the words stuck somewhere behind my ribs because we all knew they wouldn't. Michael held the car door for his mother, helped Lydia with the seatbelt, then drove away without once glancing in the rearview mirror. I stood on the sidewalk watching the car disappear, the folder heavy in my arms, the courthouse doors closing behind me, with a hollow sound that seemed to echo through my chest. All the stories I had told myself about control, about fixing things, about keeping my family together, fell apart as quickly as the marriage I thought could survive anything. And in the end, Michael didn't raise his voice, didn't break a single law, didn't lose his composure for even a second. He just used the truth, written down in black and white, to take everything that mattered and leave me standing alone with nothing but the sound of traffic filling the silence. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching. You are watching. You are watching. You are watching. You are watching.